Justice isn't always soft.
The wrench slipped from my grease-stained fingers at exactly 2:17 a.m., clattering against the concrete floor of my garage like a gunshot in the silence. I'd been fixing the outboard motor for 3 hours, trying to drown out the sound of Leah's voice drifting down from our bedroom window, that breathless, excited whisper she used when talking to someone who wasn't me. "Nate?" Her voice cut through the night air, sharp with false concern. "You haven't stopped smiling since that call earlier. What's going on down there?" I straightened up, wiping my hands on an oil-stained rag, and looked up at her silhouette framed in the yellow light of our bedroom window. My wife of 12 years stood there in her silk nightgown, the expensive one I'd bought her for our anniversary last month, back when I still believed we had something worth celebrating. "I'm thrilled, sweetheart," I called back, letting my voice carry the weight of every bitter discovery I'd made over the past 2 weeks. "Absolutely thrilled because I just found out you're carrying his baby, and my lawyer called confirming every single piece of evidence I needed to finalize our divorce. Best day of my life." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the crickets seemed to hold their breath. Then I heard it, the sharp crack of ceramic hitting hardwood as her coffee mug shattered against our bedroom floor. "My name is Nate Brooks, and I'm a 43-year-old marine engineer who fixes boats for a living in this godforsaken coastal town that pretends to be quaint but harbors more secrets than a Stephen King novel. I've got calloused hands, a sarcastic mouth, and until 2 weeks ago, I thought I had a marriage worth fighting for. The town motto should be nothing happens here, except the stuff nobody talks about. But people do talk, especially at Cassie's bar down by the marina, where the fishermen drink away their disappointments, and the gossip flows faster than cheap whiskey. That's where I first heard about my wife's extracurricular activities. "Your Leah's been spending a lot of time at that fancy law firm," old Murphy had slurred into his beer. "Working real late with that boss of hers, Mark Grady. They call him Pumper on account of how he used to lift weights in college." I laughed it off then. Leah was ambitious, ruthless in her pursuit of partnership at Grady, Stone & Associates. She'd always worked late. But Murphy's words planted a seed that grew into something ugly when I started paying attention to the details. The hotel receipts crumpled in her jacket pocket, the new lingerie she never wore for me, the way she'd started showering immediately after coming home from work, washing away evidence I was too trusting to recognize. But the final nail in the coffin came 3 nights ago when I overheard her laughing with her best friend Gina at our kitchen table. "God, you should see Nate trying to fix that stupid boat," Leah had giggled. "He's so focused on his little projects while I'm getting my real workout with Mark. All that pumping iron really pays off, if you know what I mean." They dissolved into laughter while I stood frozen in the hallway, my world crumbling around me like the foundation of a house built on lies. Now, as I watched Leah's shadow disappear from the window, I allowed myself a genuine smile for the first time in weeks, because while she'd been playing house with her boss, I'd been doing what I do best, methodical planning and preparation. Tommy Keegan, my buddy from the police department, had helped me document everything legally. Photos of her car at Mark's apartment complex, credit card statements showing charges at romantic restaurants on nights she claimed to be working late, phone records that painted a picture clearer than any confession. But documentation was just the beginning. What Leah and her lover didn't know was that I'd spent my entire adult life solving problems that seemed impossible to fix. Broken engines, damaged hulls, relationships that had run aground. I approached them all the same way, methodically, patiently, and when the time was right, decisively. The next morning, I was elbow deep in the engine compartment of a fishing trawler when I spotted Mark's silver BMW pulling into the marina parking lot. He climbed out wearing his $1,000 suit and Italian leather shoes, looking as out of place among the working boats as a peacock in a chicken coop. "Brooks," he called out, his voice carrying that entitled tone that rich men use when they think they're slumming with the common folk. "I need to talk to you." I wiped my hands and turned to face him, taking in his perfectly styled hair and manicured fingernails. Mark Grady was everything I wasn't, polished, wealthy, and apparently irresistible to my wife. He was also about to learn that money couldn't buy him out of every problem. "Mark," I said, keeping my voice neutral, "what brings you down to the working side of town?" "Look, I know this is awkward," he began, straightening his tie nervously. "But Leah told me about your conversation last night. I think we should handle this like adults." "Adults," I repeated, tasting the word. "You mean like adults who honor their marriage vows? Or adults who sneak around behind their spouse's back for months? His face flushed red, but he pressed on. I care about Leah more than you apparently do, or you wouldn't be spending all your time down here with these boats instead of— Instead of what? I interrupted, stepping closer. Instead of noticing that my wife was screwing her boss? Trust me, Mark, I noticed plenty. The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of Cassie, who ran the marina's bait shop and had ears like a bat when it came to local drama. "Morning, Nate," she called out cheerfully, then noticed Mark. Well, if it isn't the famous Pumper Grady himself. Heard you've been making quite an impression around town." Mark's face went from red to purple. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't, honey," Cassie laughed. "Word of advice, though. Next time you want to have a private conversation, maybe don't do it in the parking lot where half the marina can hear you." As Mark stormed back to his BMW, I realized that my quiet life was about to become very public, very quickly. In a town this size, secrets had a half-life of about 24 hours before they became common knowledge. But that was fine with me. I'd spent 12 years being the reliable husband, the steady provider, the man who fixed things quietly and without complaint. Now it was time for a different approach. That evening, I sat in my garage sharpening a set of fishing hooks when Leah finally came home. She moved through our house like a ghost, avoiding eye contact and speaking in whispers when she spoke at all. "We need to talk," she said finally, standing in the doorway between the house and garage. "Do we?" I asked, not looking up from my work. "Seems like you've been doing plenty of talking lately, just not to me." "Nate, please. This doesn't have to be ugly." I set down the hook and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She was beautiful, I'd give her that. Even now, with guilt written across her features like graffiti on a wall, she was stunning. But beauty without loyalty was just an expensive facade on a rotten foundation. "You're right," I said, standing up and dusting off my hands. "It doesn't have to be ugly. It's going to be devastating instead." The charity gala at the Ocean View Hotel was supposed to be Leah's moment to shine. She'd bought a new dress, black silk that probably cost more than I made in a week, and spent 2 hours getting ready. She looked like a movie star walking into that ballroom on Mark's arm, while I nursed a beer at the bar, watching the performance unfold. "Heard she's moving up in the world," someone whispered behind me. "Mark's world, anyway." The snickering that followed felt like fingernails on a chalkboard. I'd lived in this town my entire life, built a reputation as a man who kept his word and minded his own business. Now I was the local entertainment, the betrayed husband who didn't know his place. But they were wrong about that last part. I knew exactly where I stood. I watched Mark guide Leah through the crowd, his hand possessive on her lower back, introducing her to his wealthy friends as if she were a prize he'd won. The sight should have made me angry, but instead, I felt something colder settle in my chest. Anger was hot and unpredictable. What I felt was calculated, methodical, and infinitely more dangerous. "You look like a man with a plan," Tommy Keegan said, sliding up to the bar beside me. He was off duty but still carried himself like a cop, all watchful eyes and careful movements. "Just enjoying the show," I replied, taking another sip of my beer. "Nate, whatever you're thinking." "I'm thinking about justice, Tommy, pure and simple." He studied my face in the mirror behind the bar. "Justice has a way of looking a lot like revenge when you're the one who's been wronged. Maybe that's because they're the same thing, just dressed up in different clothes." The first phase of my plan had already begun. While Leah was playing the devoted girlfriend, I'd been busy with my own social activities. Specifically, I'd been having coffee with Mark's wife, Patricia, who'd been conveniently out of town visiting her sister for the past month. Patricia Grady was a nice woman who deserved better than a cheating husband. She was also the type of person who believed in consequences, which made her the perfect ally for what I had in mind. "I don't understand," she'd said when I showed her the photographs Tommy had helped me take. Mark said he was working late, that the firm was going through a busy period. "He was working late," I'd replied gently, "just not on legal briefs." The conversation that followed was painful but necessary. Patricia cried, asked questions I couldn't answer, and finally thanked me for telling her the truth. By the time I left her sister's house, she was already making plans to return home early. Now, watching Mark preen in his tuxedo, while my wife smiled adoringly up at him, I felt a grim satisfaction knowing that his perfect world was about to come crashing down. The second phase began the next morning when I paid a visit to Mark's apartment complex. I'd done my homework, learning his routines through careful observation. He left for work at exactly 7:30 a.m., returned for lunch most days around noon, and usually didn't come home until after 8 in the evening. His BMW was parked in its assigned spot, gleaming in the morning sun like a monument to his success. I walked past it casually, noting the unlocked windows in his ground-floor apartment, the lack of security cameras, and the general air of careless privilege that surrounded the place. Mark Grady had lived his entire life believing that money could insulate him from consequences. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I returned that afternoon with a toolbox and the kind of focused determination that had made me good at my job. The apartment's window lock was a joke, the kind of cheap hardware that looked secure but could be bypassed by anyone with basic mechanical knowledge. Inside, Mark's apartment was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive furniture, a well-stocked bar, and photographs of himself in various poses of athletic triumph from his college days. The place reeked of cologne and self-importance. I started with his prized whiskey collection, carefully opening each bottle and pouring the contents down the kitchen sink. 30-year-old scotch, vintage bourbon, rare Irish whiskey, thousands of dollars worth of liquid status symbols swirling down the drain. Next, I moved to his bedroom, where I found evidence of his affair with my wife scattered around like trophies. A silk scarf I recognized, earrings I'd bought her for Christmas, and a framed photo of the two of them that made my stomach turn. I took the photo and left everything else untouched. Let him wonder what else I might have seen. The final touch was my signature, a note left on his pillow in block letters. Shouldn't leave things open. Anything could happen. A concerned neighbor. I was back at the marina by 3 o'clock, working on a boat engine when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at Cassie's bar at 8. Come alone. M. Mark was panicking, which meant my plan was working perfectly. Cassie's bar at 8 o'clock was crowded with the usual mix of fishermen, dock workers, and locals who preferred their entertainment unfiltered. I arrived early and claimed a table in the back corner where I could watch the door. Mark showed up 15 minutes late, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past 8 hours. His usual polish was gone, replaced by the haggard appearance of a man who'd discovered that his perfect life had some very imperfect vulnerabilities. "You son of a witch," he hissed, sliding into the chair across from me. "You broke into my apartment." "Did I?" I asked mildly, sipping my beer. "That's a serious accusation, Mark. I hope you have proof." "I know it was you." Knowing and proving are two different things. I thought a lawyer would understand that distinction. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something," I replied, matching his tone. "You think you can take whatever you want because you've got money and connections. But some things aren't for sale, and some people don't intimidate easily." "This is about Leah. This is about respect," I interrupted. "Something you've never learned to show." Mark's face flushed red, and for a moment I thought he might try to take a swing at me. Instead, he stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "This isn't over," he snarled. "No," I agreed, raising my beer in a mock toast. "It's just getting started." As he stormed out of the bar, I caught Cassie watching me from behind the counter. She walked over with a fresh beer and a knowing smile. "That man's got more enemies than friends," she said, settling into Mark's abandoned chair. "Word around town is that his wife came home early from her trip. Seems she had some interesting questions about his recent activities." "Really?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Oh yes, Patricia Grady was seen moving her things out of their house this morning, took everything she could fit in her car and drove straight to her lawyer's office." The satisfaction I felt was better than any whiskey Mark had been hoarding. Phase 2 was complete, and the ripple effects were already spreading through the community like cracks in thin ice. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Patricia Grady filed for divorce on a Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon, the entire legal community in our small town was buzzing with the news. Mark's reputation, so carefully cultivated over the years, began to crumble like a sandcastle at high tide. I learned about the filing from Tommy, who'd heard it from his cousin who worked at the courthouse. The details were deliciously brutal. Patricia was seeking half of everything, including Mark's partnership stake in the law firm, and she'd hired the most vicious divorce attorney in 3 counties to make it happen. "She's not messing around," Tommy told me over coffee at the marina. Word is she's got photographs, financial records, the whole 9 yards. Someone did their homework. Good for her, I said, keeping my expression neutral. A woman deserves to know the truth about her marriage. What Tommy didn't know, what nobody knew except Patricia and me, was that I'd spent the past week helping her document every aspect of Mark's infidelity. Not just the affair with Leah, but a pattern of behavior that stretched back years. It turned out that my wife wasn't Mark's first conquest. Patricia had suspected for a long time, but had never been able to prove anything. When I provided her with the evidence she needed, she'd embraced the opportunity for revenge with an enthusiasm that surprised us both. He always said I was too weak to leave him, she'd told me during one of our planning sessions. He's about to find out how wrong he was. The third phase of my plan required more subtlety than the first two. Instead of direct confrontation, I needed to let Mark's own actions destroy him. And, like most arrogant men, he was perfectly willing to provide the rope for his own hanging. The opportunity came when Leah announced she was taking a week off work to think about our marriage. She moved into Gina's apartment downtown, leaving our house feeling empty and strange. But her absence gave me the freedom to operate without constantly looking over my shoulder. I started with Mark's professional life, using contacts I'd built over 20 years of working in a small town. The marina serviced boats for wealthy clients, including several judges, city council members, and business leaders who had dealings with Mark's law firm. It's amazing what people will tell you when they don't think you're paying attention. Conversations overheard while working on their boats, casual comments about legal fees and questionable billing practices, complaints about Mark's arrogance and unprofessional behavior. I began connecting dots, following paper trails, and asking innocent questions that led to not-so-innocent discoveries. Mark's law firm wasn't just handling routine legal work. They were involved in some questionable real estate deals that skirted the edges of legality. The beauty of it was that I didn't have to manufacture evidence or break any laws. I just had to pay attention and let Mark's own greed expose him. The breakthrough came when I was working on Judge Morrison's yacht and overheard him complaining to his wife about a case that had been mysteriously delayed. "Mark Grady keeps finding new reasons to postpone the hearing," the judge muttered, almost like he's buying time for someone to cover their tracks. That evening, I made a phone call to the State Bar Association's ethics hotline. I didn't make any accusations. I simply reported what I'd overheard and suggested they might want to take a closer look at the firm's recent activities. By Friday, investigators were quietly reviewing files at Grady, Stone, and Associates. But my personal revenge was just getting started. Saturday night, I was nursing a beer at Cassie's when Leah walked in with Gina. They took a table near the front, clearly intending to be seen. Leah was wearing the dress she'd worn on our first date, which felt like a deliberate insult. "She's trying to make you jealous," Cassie observed, refilling my glass. "She's succeeding," I admitted, "just not in the way she thinks." I watched my wife laugh and flirt with the other patrons, playing the role of the newly liberated woman. She was putting on a show, trying to prove that she didn't need me, that she was better off without the boring husband who spent his time fixing boats. What she didn't know was that her performance was being recorded by Tommy, who was sitting at the bar in civilian clothes with a clear view of her table. Every laugh, every flirtatious gesture, every moment of apparent happiness was being documented for the divorce proceedings. "You know," I said to Cassie, loud enough for my voice to carry across the bar, "it's funny how some people think they can just walk away from their responsibilities without consequences." Several heads turned in my direction, including Leah's. I raised my beer in her direction with a smile that had nothing to do with friendliness. "Here's to new beginnings," I announced, "and to people getting exactly what they deserve." The bar fell quiet for a moment, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Leah stood up abruptly and walked out, leaving Gina to scramble after her. "That was cold, Nate," someone called out from across the room. "Sometimes cold is what the situation requires," I replied. Monday morning brought news that sent shockwaves through the legal community. Mark Grady had been suspended from practicing law, pending the outcome of the state bar investigation. The firm's partners, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal, had frozen his assets and begun their own internal review. I learned about it from Patricia, who called me with barely contained glee in her voice. "They found irregularities in his client trust accounts," she reported. "Nothing criminal, but enough to raise serious questions about his professional judgment." "I'm sorry to hear that," I lied smoothly. "No, you're not," she laughed. "And neither am I. He always said his reputation was untouchable. Turns out it was just untouched." That afternoon, Leah showed up at the marina looking desperate and defeated. She found me working on a cabin cruiser, my hands covered in grease and my attention focused on a stubborn engine problem. "Nate, we need to talk," she said. "Do we?" I asked without looking up. "Last I heard, you were thinking about our marriage from the comfort of Gina's apartment. Mark's in trouble. The firm suspended him, and Patricia's divorce is getting ugly. I think I made a mistake." I set down my wrench and looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived. She was still beautiful, but there was something different about her now. The confidence was gone, replaced by uncertainty and fear. "A mistake," I repeated. "That's what you call it. I know you're angry." "Angry?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Leah, anger is what you feel when someone cuts you off in traffic. What I feel is something much more permanent." "What do you want from me?" she asked, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I want you to understand that actions have consequences," I said. "You made your choice when you decided that our marriage vows were negotiable. Now you get to live with the results." She tried to argue, to explain, to justify her behavior, but I'd already turned back to the engine. After a few minutes of being ignored, she gave up and left. That evening, I sat in my garage cleaning my tools and planning the final phase of my revenge. Mark and Leah had taken everything I'd built over 12 years of marriage and treated it like garbage. Now it was time to show them what real loss felt like. The annual Founders' Day celebration was coming up in 2 weeks. The whole town would be there, including everyone who'd been whispering about my humiliation. It would be the perfect stage for the final act of this drama. I smiled as I put away the last of my tools. Mark Grady thought his worst problems were behind him. He had no idea what was coming next. Founders' Day in our town was always held in the Central Park, with booths selling local crafts, a small stage for speeches and announcements, and enough gossip floating around to fuel conversations for months. This year's celebration had drawn an even bigger crowd than usual, thanks to the ongoing drama surrounding Mark Grady's fall from grace and the dissolution of several prominent marriages. I arrived early, wearing my best shirt and carrying a manila folder that contained the culmination of 4 weeks of careful planning. Tommy was already there, positioned near the stage with a clear view of the crowd. Patricia Grady sat in the front row, her divorce attorney beside her, both of them looking like they were about to enjoy a very satisfying show. Mark showed up 20 minutes before the scheduled start, looking haggard and desperate. His suspension from the law firm had become permanent, his assets were frozen pending multiple investigations, and his reputation was in ruins. But he still carried himself with that entitled swagger that had always made my skin crawl. Leah arrived with Gina, both of them dressed like they were attending a fashion show rather than a community event. My wife had been staying at Gina's apartment for 3 weeks now, playing the role of the wronged woman who'd been driven away by her unreasonable husband. The irony was lost on everyone except me. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mayor Davidson announced from the stage, "we have a special presentation today from one of our longtime residents, Nate Brooks." I'd volunteered to give a speech about the importance of community values, a request that had been enthusiastically approved by the organizing committee. After all, I was the stable, reliable marine engineer who'd lived here his entire life. Who better to talk about integrity and trust? I climbed the steps to the small stage and looked out over the crowd of familiar faces. These were my neighbors, my customers, people I'd known for decades. They'd watched my marriage fall apart with a mixture of sympathy and morbid curiosity, and now they were about to see how the story ended. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice carrying clearly across the park. "I want to talk today about something that's been on my mind lately, the importance of truth in a community like ours." I opened the manila folder and pulled out the first document, a photograph that I held up for everyone to see. "This is a picture of my wife Leah and her boss Mark Grady at the Ocean View Hotel 3 months ago," I announced. "They were there for what Mark told his wife was a business meeting. Funny thing about business meetings, they don't usually involve booking rooms by the hour." A murmur ran through the crowd. Leah's face went white, and Mark looked like he was about to be sick. "Now, I know what some of you are thinking," I continued. "This is private business, something that should be handled quietly between adults. And you're right, it should have been. But when private business becomes public entertainment, when my marriage becomes the subject of barroom jokes and coffee shop gossip, then I think the community deserves to know the whole truth." I pulled out the next document, a financial statement that I'd obtained through Patricia's divorce attorney. This shows how Mark Grady used client funds to pay for his extracurricular activities. Hotel rooms, expensive dinners, jewelry that never made it home to his wife. Not technically illegal, but definitely not the kind of behavior you'd expect from someone who holds himself up as a pillar of the community. Mark started to stand, but Patricia's attorney whispered something in his ear that made him sit back down. "But the real interesting part," I said, pulling out a thick stack of papers, "is what happened when Mark's world started falling apart. See, when a man like Mark Grady gets desperate, he makes mistakes. Big mistakes." I held up a recording device that Tommy had helped me obtain legally. 3 days ago, Mark approached my wife with an interesting proposition. He wanted her to lie under oath in his divorce proceedings, to claim that his affair was actually her idea, and that she seduced him. In exchange, he promised to take her with him when he left town. The crowd was dead silent now, hanging on every word. "The problem with that plan," I continued, "is that Leah was wearing a wire when they had that conversation. See, it turns out that when your whole life falls apart, you start looking for ways to save what you can, and what Leah wanted to save was her marriage to me." I looked directly at my wife, who was staring at me with a mixture of shock and terror. Unfortunately for both of them, I'm not interested in salvaging anything from this wreckage. Leah made her choice when she decided that our marriage vows were suggestions rather than commitments. And Mark made his choice when he decided that other people's lives were acceptable collateral damage for his entertainment. I pulled out the final document, a legal filing that I'd submitted that morning. So here's what's going to happen. Mark Grady is going to leave town, which shouldn't be difficult since he's about to be disbarred, and his assets are being seized to pay back the clients he defrauded. Leah is going to sign divorce papers that give her exactly what she contributed to our marriage, which is nothing, and I'm going to rebuild my life without either of them in it. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, someone in the back of the crowd started clapping. Others joined in until the entire park was filled with applause. Mark stood up and tried to push through the crowd, but Tommy was waiting for him at the edge of the park with a warrant for his arrest on charges of attempting to suborn perjury. Leah sat frozen in her chair, tears streaming down her face, as the full weight of her situation finally hit her. She'd lost her husband, her lover, her job, and her reputation all in the space of a single speech. As for me, I stepped down from the stage and walked through the crowd of people who were patting me on the back and offering congratulations. I'd done something that most people only dream about. I'd gotten complete, devastating revenge on the people who'd wronged me, and I'd done it legally, publicly, and with the full support of my community. I climbed into my truck and drove home to the house that was finally, truly mine. Behind me, I could hear the crowd still buzzing with excitement over the morning's revelations. By evening, the story would be told and retold in every bar, coffee shop, and dinner table in town. Mark Grady and my ex-wife would become cautionary tales, examples of what happens when you underestimate the quiet, reliable people who make communities work. And I would go back to fixing boats, secure in the knowledge that I'd proven something important about the nature of justice. Sometimes the good guys really do win.